I would like to take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Miranda. I am a funeral and memorial celebrant here in Santa Fe. And I've been helping the family create a meaningful tribute for Bob. And I just want to say what an absolute honor it has been to get to know Bob, because I personally didn't know him. But not only get to know him and hear his story, but to be able to be here with all of you today. I want to share a true story with all of you. In late May, just a few months ago, I had a dream that Bob's burial and his celebration of life wouldn't happen on the same day. The interment would change to July 7th, and the celebration of life for July 8th. In this dream, I also heard a message. This change is for Pam's emotional well-being, and I also want to be buried on my birthday. I vividly remembered this dream the next morning, but I hesitated to share it with Pam because from our first conversation, she had always planned for the burial and the celebration of life to be back-to-back for today, July 8th. And I wasn't going to be the new kid in town telling Pam that we're going to be making changes. But it turns out I didn't have to call her, because 4 days later, after the dream, Pam reached out to me. Through tears, she was able to tell me there were scheduling conflicts at the National Cemetery, and Bob's burial has to be on the 7th and not the 8th. I could tell Pam was distraught, she was upset, and she had every right to feel these emotions. But what she said next was beautiful to witness. She said, as hard as this is, maybe this is for the best. I don't know if I could handle both services the same day. And it was in that moment when I remembered Bob's message. This change is for Pam, and I want to be buried on my birthday. Yesterday was Bob's 82nd birthday. The first birthday we had to spend without him, and the day we laid him to rest. But what if Bob stepped in and guided this whole situation, just like he always did when times were tough? What if this was Bob's way of saying, trust me, I got you. I know you're hurting, but maybe this can make it better. I believe the lessons in this situation was to let go of control and trust. Even when our plans change, maybe it's for the best. And maybe, just maybe, our loved ones in spirit have a hand to play in the unexpected changes. And to me, Pam recognized the lesson, and she let go of the need to control. And as uncomfortable as it was for her, she surrendered. And that, my friends, is courage. There is a prayer, a mantra Bob lived by, and it was the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Serenity, courage, wisdom. 3 attributes that shaped Bob into the man he was, the man we know, and how he will always be remembered. Accepting the things he could not change actually started at an early age for Bob. He and his 3 younger siblings, Deborah, Stephen, and Kevin, they were corporate brats. Robert Sr., Bob's father, was a seasoned salesman for DuPont, one of the world's largest chemical companies selling synthetic materials like nylon and Teflon, very important materials for the late 40s and 50s. And because of Robert's success, the Dunns moved often. From Oklahoma City to New Jersey, Kansas City, Cohasset, Massachusetts, then back to New Jersey. And Bob knew moving from state to state was completely out of his control. But what he could control was how he adapted to each new place new neighborhood, new school. From the beginning, Bob made the best out of every situation, and he used his natural gifts to meet new friends and create a life that was meaningful for him. Bob was popular, he was charming, he was good looking, intelligent, he was a natural athlete, especially in baseball. He was the guy you looked at and asked yourself, how did he get it all? And after graduating Cohasset High, Bob decided to stay east, and he attended Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He joined the fraternity Sigma Nu, made lifelong friends, partied a little too hard, but managed to graduate with a bachelor's in history. Now, history wasn't just a major in college for Bob. It was a passion. It was a topic that ultimately brought great joy and purpose throughout Bob's life. And history is what Bob loved to read. He loved to watch. He read any newspaper. He always was up to speed on current events, and he actively participated in politics. And as we all know, Bob definitely had an opinion about politics. But his love for history goes deeper than books and movies. Bob loved history because he enjoyed retaining all the facts, because he knew if he brought all the facts to a conversation, then it was highly unlikely he was going to lose that debate. And he was always up for a good debate, especially if it was in politics. You see, knowledge was power for Bob, and he often knew how and when to use it. And naturally, it was his knowledge that turned into wisdom. He had this intuitive ability to give advice and insight and connect with others from his own life experiences. And because Bob lived by strong ethics and made practical judgments, he was someone many, many people could trust. After college, there wasn't a set plan for Bob. He didn't know what the future held for him. But what he did know was his pride for our country. And he felt this deep urge to volunteer and enlist in the military. And so he did. Bob raised his right hand, taking oath of office as first lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. And you see, it was the military that provided structure and discipline, camaraderie, high standards, leadership, and purpose, values that were the blueprint to Bob's life. He was a decorated veteran, earning a double Purple Heart and the South Vietnamese Gallantry Cross, awarded for displaying valor and heroic conduct while fighting the enemy. He risked his life, he saved others, and he was one of the most proud soldiers, proud veterans you would ever meet. He served 3 years total, with 1 year in Vietnam, and his devotion as a Marine and supporting the veterans remained a big, big part of his life. Once enlistment was over, Bob was sure to re-up, go into recruitment, and eventually climb the ranks. But I think he knew the military life came at a cost. He wasn't entirely sure if that was the path for him, and his family definitely didn't think so either. Not re-enlisting was a difficult decision for Bob. This was yet another time in his life when he didn't know what was next for him. Life seemed uncertain, and so all he could do was follow his gut and trust that his next move would work out. Bob packed his things, headed west to California, and began creating an indulgent, limitless life. So Bob eventually landed a job in sales for Sertron. Sertron is a manufacturing and distributing company in the 70s that made blank audio tapes, video cassettes, and floppy disks. And Bob, being the natural, engaging salesman that he is, and also looking like this, yeah, it was inevitable he would become successful. He's a stud. I'm sorry. Bob's a stud. Bob quickly rose to the top at Sertron and was given title as National Sales Manager. On paper, Bob had it all. Now living in Topanga Canyon with his brother Kevin by his side, his thriving career, his dream home, a sports car, this was the life Bob was searching for. A life he thought he wanted. But that too came at a cost. Bob's role at Sertron required a lot of traveling. There was a lot of drinking and partying. It was a glamorous life that offered financial security, but not emotional security. I think this is something many of us go through. We create this idea of the American dream, believing if we get the job, the house, the car, this is what gives us happiness. But deep down, there's still something missing. And perhaps this is what Bob felt in California. You see, after he was honorably discharged from the Marines, there was some unhealed trauma that caused some discomfort, maybe some silent suffering. I believe most veterans who serve in war, every man, every woman, will come home a changed person. Because after combat, those soldiers witness life and death in a capacity most civilians can't comprehend. And Bob, he could empathize. He knew the pain veterans carried. He was familiar with the PTSD and the addictions that followed after war. And it later became Bob's mission, his purpose, to give back and support our veterans. He advocated for their financial freedom, for their mental health, and their health care, because that is what veterans deserve. Eventually, Bob came to a crossroads in California. He knew if he didn't make a change, his life would take a turn for the worse. And change is hard. It can feel unsettling, intimidating, because sometimes change means that we have to start all over again as a new person. And maybe that's what Bob feared. But those closest to Bob were there to support him. You see, Bob grew up in a loving home. His father, Robert Sr., and his mother, Helen, created a household with strong work ethics, unbreakable family values, and instilling the importance of sibling love between Robert Jr., Deborah, Stephen, and Kevin. The 4 children grew up respecting and loving each other more than anything. Of course, there was the competitive nature between them, but at the end of the day, they always had each other's back. They always picked up the phone and called. When Bob felt lost in California, his sister Deborah and his brother Stephen were already in New Mexico. And they both assured Bob New Mexico waters were nice and they're refreshing, and he should just come to the Southwest and take a dip and just see how he likes it. And so Bob did. The move from California was a pivotal point in Bob's life. He resigned from his successful career at Sertron, he sold his dream home in Topanga, and he said a goodbye to a life that was so familiar to him. God, grant me the courage to change the things I can. And Bob did find his courage again. Maybe it was the same courage he had as a young child moving from state to state. Maybe it was the same courage he had when he stepped foot onto Vietnam as a Marine. But it was truly Bob's courage that made him a resilient man. Courage that helped him take risks. And for Bob, New Mexico surprised him because it offered him a different kind of life he always dreamed of, but wasn't sure if it was possible for him. Now Bob was a single, good-looking bachelor. His career in real estate was beginning to take off, albeit he was still partying, but he was mingling with the coolest people in town. I think he was just trying to find where he belonged in Santa Fe. And it didn't take long for Bob to recognize that Santa Fe is where he'll find success, true love, family, and stability. Because when Bob met Pam, everything changed. And I mean everything. Bob knew if he was going to commit to Pam, he was going to love and cherish everything Pam had to offer. And that was Jack. From the beginning, Bob embraced Jack as if he was his own child. And throughout Jack's life, Bob was always a solid and loving, supportive father figure. That's just the kind of man Bob was. He met a lady he loved, and he knew he would do anything to keep her and their son by his side. It was Pam and Jack that gave Bob the stability he never knew he needed. Pam and Bob's life together was dynamic. It was extraordinary and unique. But most of all, it was built on a strong foundation. And it was so strong and so in sync that they wore matching outfits. Yeah. When I came across this, I didn't know if it was your work attire or if you two were just aligned that day. And it was their rock-solid foundation that kept them together for over 40 years. There is so much love between Bob and Pam, a couple who stayed together through everything, a partnership who pushed each other outside of their safety net, especially when it came to traveling. Because Bob, he was a creature of comfort. He loved his golf at Quail Run, he loved his coffee, he loved being at home watching sports, especially the Red Sox and the Celtics. He loved being with his animals and spending time with his granddaughters, Alyssa and Emily. It was family, golf, sports, and home. That was Bob's serenity. It was the simplest things that made him the happiest. So getting Bob on a plane wasn't easy. But once they arrived at their destination, whichever country Pam dragged them to, Bob loved every day. He loved every moment, every memory, because that's who he was. Bob was someone who truly lived in the present moment. Pam brought the spontaneity. She brought the craziness and the fun into their relationship. She was the gas, while Bob was the pragmatic, structured, let's pump the brakes before we act. But when Pam and Bob joined forces in real estate together, that took their relationship to another level. They were Santa Fe's powerhouse couple, and they both took their profession very seriously. Bob and Pam had numerous articles written about their success as realtors and their personal life. Bob and Pam were so popular in town, even their dog, Rocky, made the newspaper. To this day, Bob and Pam are the only real estate couple in Santa Fe to both be awarded Realtor of the Year. Real estate was Bob's life. He was always in the mindset of being part of the solution rather than the problem. And our community recognized his passion. Bob was elected president for Santa Fe Association Realtors in 1995, and in 1999 he was elected president of Realtors Association of New Mexico. For 10 years, Bob served on the New Mexico Real Estate Commission under former Governor Bill Richardson, who is a dear, dear, dear friend of Bob's, and was also under Governor Susana Martinez. Bob was a board member for the Santa Fe Rail Yard Committee because giving back to his community is what he loved to do. He truly made a difference in New Mexico and Santa Fe. And not just in real estate, but creating this town into a better place to live. And because of Bob's efforts and his integrity and his attention to detail, these attributes turned into many awards. Throughout Bob's career, he was honored Realtor Sales Associate of the Year in 1989 under Stan Evans. In 2006, Bob was awarded Realtor of the Year for Santa Fe Association and National Realtor of the Year for New Mexico. 2006 was a big year. And in 2024, just 2 years ago, when Bob was 80 years young, he was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award. Above all of this, he remained humble. Bob never let his ego get the best of him. And he achieved this level of success because his heart and soul was in everything he did. And he also had the encouragement and support from Pam, which was so important in their partnership. For the most part, Pam and Bob were always on the same page because they both agreed to date for a very long time. And I mean a long time. Pam and Bob were together for 34 years before they got married. Can you believe that? 34 years. And they were married for 8 years. So for 42 years, they chose each other every day. Their relationship is a beautiful example of true love, a love that was tested, but a love that guided Bob and Pam to become the best versions of themselves. Bob experienced unconditional love from Pam and Jack, his siblings, his family, his friends. Everyone appreciated and accepted Bob for all that he was. And it was this unconditional love that helped him get sober. It was the love that helped Bob become the best version of himself. Bob's sobriety played a major role in his life. It was sobriety that helped him find his soul. Letting go alcohol after years of addiction isn't easy. But how Bob found recovery is a story of hope and a story worth sharing because it's an example of how our life can miraculously change if we're open to it. On New Year's Eve, many moons ago, Pam and Bob were at a party. And during the party, a well-known, famous Santa Fe couple came up to Bob and asked him if he was a friend of Bill W. A friend of Bill W. is a common phrase used in the AA community. And the very next day, on January 1st, over 30 years ago, Bob walked into an AA meeting and he remained sober ever since. AA isn't just a recovery program for Bob, it was a way of life. When he decided to get sober, he put the same amount of energy and passion as he did into anything he wanted to master. AA was a way to find freedom, to break loose from the handcuffs of addiction. Pam called Bob's recovery a spiritual miracle because for decades Bob drank and then one day he didn't. And perhaps it was a miracle. Bob was someone who openly talked about his recovery in hopes to help some other person's life. He was someone who collected coins. He found a sponsor, and he sponsored others who were also walking the path of sobriety. And it was AA that opened his mind and heart to something bigger, a higher power. I'm not sure we could call Bob spiritual because he wasn't the type to label anything, especially himself. Besides being a Blue Dog Democrat, I think that we can safely label him. But what is safe to say is that Bob created his own type of religion, a faith, a belief that fit him perfectly. It was his own serenity, his wisdom, and his courage that carried him through the hardest times of his life, especially when his sister Deborah, who passed away from cancer, and his brother Stephen from a fatal car accident. These two other candles represent Deborah and Stephen. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. What should amaze us all is how Bob remained sober during his most challenging times. During the darkest moments, he chose to find the lessons behind his losses. And I truly believe he was able to do this because he was true to himself. On the front of an AA coin reads, "To thine own self be true." What does this even mean? To thine own self be true. For Bob, it stood for integrity, being true to his word, being courageous and independent. It stood for unconditionally loving those around him, enjoying the simple things in life, giving back to his community, supporting our veterans, advocating for democracy, speaking his truth even when others didn't agree. To thine own self be true. And if Bob were standing here today, he would ask you, what does being true mean to you? I'm now going to open up the microphone and invite family and friends to share a memory, a story of Bob, and what he meant to you. And I'm going to have Bob's brother, his baby brother, Kevin, begin the tributes.
Boy, oh boy, what a showing for Bob, what love I see out there. Tam, I know that this is not a book, so it's just a couple of little cards, so I'll make this short. Dunn siblings love to talk, and I'm probably close to the top of the list, but I'm going to try to keep it short here. So, I know all of you have had so many rich experiences with Bob. What I'm here to just give you a short chronicle of is my life with Bob, my knowing Bob. Bob was actually 8 years older than I, and so we were very far apart. There were two siblings in front of me, which Bob had this relationship with. So it was not something that Bob and I were always being in touch with each other. You know, he was closer to those siblings just because of their age, and my 8 years younger. I do remember one thing, and I'll never forget it because it terrified me. Bob brought me up to the top of this hill on this little red bike. Didn't have training wheels, didn't have any level space. It was the top of a hill. And for me, it was like a mountain. And Bob sat there and he said, "Kevin, you're going to ride this bike." And he just pushed me off the top of this hill. And I went running down. He goes, "Pedal, Kevin, pedal, Kevin, pedal, Kevin." And eventually I did. Somehow I made it to the bottom of the hill unscathed. Unlike my other experience with my other brother, who made this makeshift type of parachute, and he tried to push me out. This thing had a sheet with strings on it. He tried to push me out the third-story window. And what I learned from that is I'm going to rely on Bob more than Stephen. Then we moved to Cohasset. And Cohasset, for me, was really the beginning of really knowing my siblings, you know, in a better way. I think my relationship with Bob, again, was 8 years different. So all I did was just watch him grow and watch him succeed in school, academics, and on the baseball field, in the basketball court, on the football field. From all I knew, he was captain of everything. He's also student council president, I think, and it was like, oh my God, I want to be like Bob. So then, New Jersey, chapter 2. Bob went off to college, and I was just in grammar school, and I was starting high school, and then Bob went to college, and then he went to Vietnam, and then he came back. And when he came back, I remember being at the airport waiting for him at Kennedy. And when he got off that plane, I just thought about him, and I said, my hero has returned, because he was my hero. What happened after that, I moved to California, and Bob and I had a great time together, maybe too much fun, as Miranda has given evidence of. But I gotta tell you, it was a lot of fun and a great ride. And then Bob ended up moving to New Mexico, which was an incredibly brilliant move as far as I'm concerned. And he eventually met Pam and became Jack's father and achieved so much. I mean, again, there's so much that Bob achieved here in New Mexico, in Santa Fe. And to this day, I'm always amazed at what Bob has accomplished. So then about 8 years passed. My brother Stephen's death in a car crash. And Bob and I were the only ones left. In the tradition of my parents wanting siblings to be the most important thing, Bob and I looked at each other and got on the phone and said, it's only us, Bob, it's the two of us. And what happened after that was just an amazing experience, because I got to know Bob really for the first time, because we were in touch, and we were the only ones, so we kind of didn't have too many choices at the time. But it was great that Bob and I, we talked practically every day, not maybe every day, but 3 or 4 times a week. He was always there for me. I was hearing about his accomplishments, not through Bob. Bob didn't tell me his accomplishments. Pam did, and Jack did, and everybody else did, not Bob, because Bob really wasn't that way. The one thing that I just remember about my journey with Bob is his strength and his courage, and how he pulled themselves up by the bootstraps many times, and in the end here in Santa Fe. And so that was a journey that I shared with Bob, and I'd like to think that the journey doesn't take second place to what happens after that. I think the journey was the most important thing that I saw in Bob, more so than what he became, and he became great things, but I thought that was the most important thing. And I get in a challenging situation, I say, well, what would Bob say here? And that's happened recently. And then I know exactly what he would say, and I found the answer. And I think I will continue to do that. I will continue to learn from Bob. And the journey's not over, and I hope it's not over for all of you. Thank you.
For those of you who do not know me, my name is Bill Schwint. And for the qualifying brokers in the room, I was Bob Dunn's first qualifying broker. The first broker that Bob met when he came into town was Louis Gonzalez. Louis had a little office somewhere at the base of Canyon Road, and Bob stumbled in there and ended up selling him a little place on Armijo Lane. Very Santa Fe-ish, very tiny, very dark, but it was a perfect home for him. I'm guessing, but I think Louis must have then referred him to our office. My broker at the time was Stan Evans. And I say that because Bob asked Louis, he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. What do you think I ought to do here? And Louis says, well, you should become a real estate agent. So he wandered into our office, and our relationship began at that time. We had both been Vietnam veterans, but we didn't know that until sometime after we met, because we didn't tell everybody, didn't tell each other about our experiences. And as Miranda indicated, Bob won 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam. He was stationed at a little place called Vung Tau. Vung Tau was a resort area. He was at a place on the DMZ that the Marines should never have been in, because it was surrounded by mountains, and they were at the bottom of the mountains, and the North Vietnamese were at the top of the mountains. So it was not a very pleasant place to be, as demonstrated by the Purple Hearts that he won there. As a real estate broker working in a real estate office, and again, you qualifying brokers will appreciate this, he became very frustrated. As we all know, he was stubborn, but he became very frustrated because at the time, New Mexico real estate law required that all real estate agents work for the seller. There was no such thing as buyer brokerage, and that used to just frustrate the hell out of Bob. He would say, I don't work for the seller. I didn't even know who the seller is. And it was interesting because later on, as he got into his real estate career and his leadership roles, that law changed. I don't know if Bob had anything to do with that, but I suspect he probably did. And then one amusing event that we had, this was probably in the 1970s or so, there was a run called the Old Santa Fe Trail Run that was held down on the plaza. And we'd run up the hill to St. John's College and then back down. So I said to Bob and to Jimmy May, another one of our associates, said, why don't we do that? I said, well, okay. But none of us had any experience running. So our broker, Stan Evans, says, hey, let's go out to the high school track every morning, and I'll clock you as you run around the track. So we'd go out for about 2 weeks before the run and run around the tracks, and Stan would have a stopwatch as if that was of any importance to us. And from that, I got Bob's nickname that I called him ever since. Stanley gave him the name Bullet, because he was faster than the other two of us. But we did all successfully run the old Santa Fe Trail. So those are some of my remembrances of Bob. We used to get together for breakfast at Tia Sophia's quite often, and I'm going to miss that now. But Kevin looks so much like Bob and sounds so much like Bob, I think I'm just going to have to ask him to come with me. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Nat Shipman, and for fellow realtors out there, it's been a long time. I got out of real estate at the end of 2018, and I just want to say that it's really good to see a lot of very familiar faces again. The one thing I would say more than anything that always impressed me about Bob, he was a class act. He was a really seriously good guy. I could rack my brain and I couldn't think of any negative anything to say about that guy. We did have one thing in common besides real estate, and that was our love for the Boston Red Sox and our love for baseball. And I was not on the Evans real estate team. I was on another team, but they used to have, I don't know if they still do, I doubt it, but too bad if they don't. They used to have a realtors baseball game. Just a goofball thing. Everybody went out and had a picnic and played baseball. And Bob and I would get out there early, and we would just play catch. I mean, we'd get like from here to the end of the room, and we'd just blast balls back and forth. We'd throw grounders and act like we're second base, throw it to first base. And we would just do that and just laugh and talk about baseball and what a great time we had. And I did not read about in October when Bob passed. I didn't realize that. And it was only the other day, a week or so ago, that I saw the notice about this service. And I just thought, oh man, wow. Every day I look at the obituary, but there's not many days when I see somebody going, oh, dude, that hurts. Because Bob was a really good guy and someone I considered a very, very dear friend. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Caitlin, and Uncle Bob, I was his niece, and I live in Colorado, and a big thing that me and Uncle Bob shared a love for was the Boston Celtics and the Patriots. I loved talking to Uncle Bob about the Celtics and the Patriots. You know, being in Colorado, I didn't have very many people that I could talk about my deep love for sports with, especially Boston. And, you know, especially when they won, the Celtics won in 2024, I remember talking to Uncle Bob about it, and just, we could talk for hours about them. Hours, and it was just so special to me. And a couple years ago, I came out to visit Aunt Pam and Uncle Bob, and Aunt Pam got a little sick, so she was kind of just resting in bed, and I was able to spend that whole week with just Uncle Bob, just talking on the patio late at night. He would tell me all these amazing stories from his amazing life, and I got to know Uncle Bob on a way deeper level, and that will always be so special to me. And he got me in the car, and he's like, okay, Caitlin, I'm gonna show you around all the houses I lived in, some of the houses he sold, all these older stories about Aunt Pam and Jack, and just sat with me, and I got to really get to know him. And every time I watch the Celtics or the Patriots, I always will think about Uncle Bob and our special talks we had. So thank you.
I spent so much time with Bob from 2017. I started with Pulte Homes in Las Campanas, and we had 6.5, 7 years together in the cold winters with nobody around, just me and Bob and a few others, and we talked about politics, and we talked about the Army, and the Marines, and we're polar opposites in just about everything. And as a young man, I respected Bob so much because as 18 years old, he was a big influence in the Realtor family, as we all know. And as I grew into that journey, and then I came back to him, and I had such a wonderful respect. And I was so angry at him so many times because we were just butting heads, and we loved to do it, and we respected one another, and we loved one another, and it was his passion and it was his glory that he had for his work and his friendship and his politics and everything that he did. But the one thing we did a lot of is we played golf, and we played some really, really good golf. And one day, with a sweet little 6-iron, Bob had a hole-in-one. I was so excited. I screamed and laughed, enjoyed, and we had a ball, and I've got a picture, and it was just wonderful. And I remember him reiterating the story down at the Las Campanas Club, and he says, I think Joe was more excited than I was. I loved him as we all did, and to have him as part of our community and our family is one of the great things that God gave us. So, thank you.
I wasn't crying 2 seconds ago, so this changes everything. I'm Lucas, Bob's nephew, Kevin's son. I think when I look out at all of you, there was tons of memories. The thing that is most lasting is that I think for everyone here, you would all say that he's probably one of the finest people you've ever met. And I think that says something about a person's legacy, as my father talked about. It's still not real that he's not here. But how he led his life is something that we'll all carry on. And I think especially to Pam, they had one of the most beautiful marriages. I still count all the years, not just the 8 years where they showed up at our wedding and said that we just got married, which was a surprise. But I think the life that you guys built here, it's a treasure to come back and see this place that is a reflection of your love and your commitment to each other. And I think we all get to take that with us in the future and live every day as Bob would live. So he's with us all. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Emil Maddock. My wife Cecilia and I lived right across the street from Bob and Pam. We were living there when they moved in. Bob, Pam, Jack, and the German Shepherd with the Bravo. We had great fun. There was a mean-looking dog, and he would really give you a lot of barking and all of that kind of stuff, very ferocious, but when you got to know him, he was gentle to come over and play with you and everything. But anyhow, we got to see Bob from a different perspective, perhaps, than most people here. We got to see Jack grow up to be the fine man that he is today. And just as an example of the kind of guy Bob was, one time, Cece and I were on a trip, and we came back when Santa Fe used to have snow, and we got home, and the driveway was all cleared out. And Bob had come over and cleared our driveway. And so over the years, we got to exchange greetings when we would go down and shovel our driveways, but actually got the better part of the deal on that because my driveway is about 3 times as long as his. So it was been interesting. We had times we would go out to dinner together. We'd exchange dinners at our homes, and I'll never forget this one time. Cece and I got a condo up in Pagosa Springs. And we know Bob was liked to play golf, so we said, hey, why don't you guys come up and join us in this condo and spend the weekend with us up there playing golf? And so they did. Well, unbeknownst to us, when we got there, the extra bedroom had 2 twin beds. And, well, we didn't, they said, well, we're going to make the beds. All right, we'll make the best of it. And so we had a great weekend of golf. Everything went really well. And then when they were leaving, I asked Pam, well, how did it go? And there were the twin beds. Well, it was interesting. That's all she would say. But anyhow, it was a real pleasure for us to see Bob and Pam in their careers as they progressed in their realty business. Kept getting better and better and better, and they did a great job here at Quail Run for all those years. And it was very sad for us when we found out that Bob had passed away. Thank you.
I think I have to lower this because, yeah, I think I have to get, okay, I had started this whole thing I was going to say, you know, Pam and I were twins, and we had the same mother, and she got the legs, and I got the short end of the stick. So I'm going to stand here and try to tell you this. But I wanted to start with Confucius, who says, and it was not Confucius, it was Jack Kornfield, who wrote a little book called Buddha's Little Instruction Book. And he said, the trouble is, you think you have time. And that's my problem too. You think you have time. And the last time that I saw Bob and Pam was at Kurt Hill's mother's, Maxine Hill's, memorial. And so we all three sat together, and then after we got finished with the memorial, we decided to come here for lunch. Anyway, then one day after the spring of 2025, when we had gone to Kurt Hill's mother, who was 93 at the time when her memorial was, and after we were there, I think I got a call from Larry McCarty, and I thought, Larry McCarty, an old friend of mine, I haven't talked to him in a long time, so I called him back, and Larry said, I have some bad news for you. He said, Bob Dunn died. And I was really stunned with the whole thing. I was really stunned because I thought back to the day that we had lunch, the day we had lunch at Quail Run, and I didn't have enough. We thought we had more time because I thought, I think we should see each other more often because we have so many things in common. And of course, and then I'm always remembered that as Confucius says, or Jack Kornfield said, the trouble is, you think you have time. And we don't have that much time. So it's very important, Raquel, that we remember what we're doing and where we're supposed to be going, because we don't have that much time. So please, we were all retired at that time, but we still didn't get together. So Pam, we'll have lunch. Okay, goodbye. That's it.
I would like to read a poem to all of you on behalf of Bob. Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away to the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference into your tone. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes that we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without effect, without the trace of a shadow on it. Life means all that it ever meant. It is the same that it ever was. There is absolute, unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind? Because I'm out of sight? I am but waiting for you, for an interval, somewhere, very near, just around the corner. All is well. It's important to acknowledge everyone here today. Many of you traveled long distance to honor Bob and his life, and many of you are here to support Pam. And without a doubt, every person in this room made Bob's life better. His life would not have been the same without you. May you continue to share memories about Bob, and may you always feel his love around you, because that can never change. When we stop talking about our loved ones is when they truly die.